Hello, everyone. Today at Threads 2023, we have a phenomenal speaker with us, Steve Chao, who is a very well-seasoned journalist and specifically around areas of conflict around the world. Welcome, and it's so good to have you with us today, Steve.
Thank you so much for having me, Anita. It's so good to be here with Threads.
Just to give a very brief introduction to Steve, he's been a journalist now for over 25 years. He was the Asia Bureau chief based in Beijing for 5 years for CTV, for example. And I understand you're also a senior Asia correspondent at Al Jazeera at one point in your career. And now you're based in Malaysia, as I understand. So nice that we could connect. Would you like to tell us any more about your background in journalism, starting off in Canada, for example?
Yes, Anita, I think you covered it well. My career started in Ottawa for CJOH TV, for the CTV outlet there. And then from there, I've worked in Halifax, Toronto, and Vancouver for CTV, covering such moments as September 11th, down in New York as well. So, quite a significant sort of period, I guess, in history. So it probably places me in a much older age bracket than many of the people listening today. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to have a front seat to much of the world's events in the last few decades.
Well, that is just phenomenal. And actually, I appreciate having your wisdom with us today, because I think that maybe perhaps a lot of the people watching Threads might be really curious to know more about the background, the scenes behind the whole mainstream media. In other words, how it's constructed, how it's structured, and how we receive our news. Because as we are trying to develop a more diverse and equitable and inclusive society, we often find that many people get their ideas about newcomers, perhaps Indigenous, largely from the media, and often from the conflictual scenes that they see portrayed through the media. So, if we were to take many regions in the world, when they see this conflict, then they somehow might be influenced by it, that shapes their perceptions about newcomers coming to Canada. So it would be lovely to hear your experiences and maybe ask some questions around how the media does that. So maybe I might begin with, do you believe that the media is influential in what we learn about other cultures and our perceptions of them? I'm speaking specifically about mainstream media, maybe.
Yeah, I would have no question or no doubt about the influence of media worldwide. And I think it's a good example of that is how in less freer societies, governments work very hard to control the media or restrict the media. And we see that in many countries around the world, because I think authorities do recognize their power and their influence. But I would say in the freer societies, that comes with a great deal of responsibility, even in the non-freer societies, actually, because as journalists, I believe that in democracies, you are what they call the fourth estate, a key pillar that, of ensuring good governance. There's accountability that, as a role of journalists, there's shining a light into dark corners of the world, asking the right questions, and then the information, like you said, to help people understand what's happening around them, whether locally or internationally.
Okay. Now, so it's up to the initiative of the journalists themselves. So nobody, if we could imagine a day in the life of Steve Chao in a conflict zone. So nobody, like an editor, comes down and says, we want this, this, and this only, go and get it. It's really up to you and to take your initiative to go outside to find the story that you want to cover, or is there some sort of angle that they, is shaped for you? I guess that's the critical question.
Yeah, and that's a good question, Anita. It's a bit of both, because the newsroom will say, for example, Ukraine right now, they'll say in Kharkiv, this is going on, or Mariupol, or in other places, this is happening. We need coverage there. So they will direct us into those areas, the hot zones, if you will, to cover what's going on. So there's always a back and forth. But Oftentimes it's us that will say, hey, you know what? Odessa's being bombed. We need to go to Odessa. And they'll be like, well, it's too dangerous, or what is the risk factor? Or we need you on air this hour, this hour, this hour. How are you going to travel down? So there's
Right.
always a negotiation going down, but there's rarely ever an angle saying, we only want to cover the Ukraine side. We don't want you to highlight the atrocities against the Russians. There really is an effort by a lot of international networks to be as impartial as ever. There's never full impartiality. There is always bias.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I say, there is an
Right.
attempt.
Okay, but having been a person who is also sort of watching many, many different channels, because I cannot rely on one specific channel, I try to watch different channels to get different perspectives. So there are many different perspectives on how something is covered. And I'm noticing more and more that other channels are actually being much more even-sided. Let's say if we were to take the Ukraine-Russian conflict, for example, that they tread very gingerly, mind you, but they try to get two different perspectives or multiple perspectives. Whereas sometimes I don't feel that I'm getting that on a Canadian channel, and I don't feel I'm getting that breadth of coverage. Do you see that there's maybe more multiple perspectives outside in other channels than what we have in Canada, if I could be so brave as to ask that?
Oh, definitely. And I would be very blunt to say that Canadians are highly underserved when it comes to international coverage. And I think you see that in the newspapers, you see that on television, and especially over the last 2 decades, the amount of international news that Canadians have gotten has shrunk 200-fold. If you're in Europe, Europeans have a culture of being interested in the rest of the world, and then therefore there is a pressure on networks to ensure they cover it better. And that's why I sort of place it on viewers as well. I don't necessarily think that the blame is just on the networks itself for not spending enough to cover, because it is a budget issue, but it's also up to the public to demand more. Now going back to the question of, do we have more balanced perspectives on different networks around the world? I would say, again, it all goes down to money and budget. If CTV or CBC had the budgets of an Al Jazeera or even of a CNN, they would be covering events much more comprehensively. In terms of bias or perspective, when we live in such a polarized world, and what's happening in terms of trend for a lot of the media is that we are moving away from, say, impartiality that we had 20 or 30 years ago, and forcing reporters to give more opinion. So therefore, you have more of a polarization on all the different networks. So MSNBC is more left, Fox News is very right. TRT is heavily influenced by the Turkish government. So you will never get a fully impartial view. Al Jazeera, I can honestly say, tries to be impartial, but it does have biases as well when it comes to the Middle East and within Qatar itself. So I think viewers always need to recognize that, that there is bias to a certain degree, in every single network or every single news establishment. But in saying that, I think that if viewers are absorbing and watching all the different networks, you can parse through what's biased and not, and give yourself a more comprehensive view. And I would say, don't just watch TV. Keep reading newspapers online. Keep reading academic journals and longer form to be better informed.
Yeah. Good suggestions. Thank you again for the wisdom. And I wanted to say that, you mentioned about Europeans being more interested in global issues. And I'm just, I think about the geography of the world, right? I mean, North America, very much on its own in the middle of 2 oceans with not a lot of neighbors, except Mexico to the south, right? And then there's the wall, right? Whereas in Europe, after you get to Calais in France, you can walk all the way to China. So, what matters is the neighbors, right? What's going on in the neighborhood, what's going on in Europe, what's going on up north in Russia, Ukraine, to the south, to the east. I mean, in all those directions, people are more invested because they have neighbors and they share borders. So it counts. Do you think if I could be again rather brave in saying that, our location in the world, sort of being in the middle of nowhere, kind of, isolates us in some way from what's really going on in the rest of the world. And it leaves us sort of, whatever the US sort of says, we take this stance together, and then there's the rest of the world. So are we missing out somehow in that, interest, let's say, in the rest of the world, because our neighbors are far away?
I think you really hit on a point, and that geography has a big part to play in terms of how interested people are in Canada for international news. I often refer to North America as Fortress North America, and it's a clear reason why the U.S. took so long to get into World War II when it did. It took Pearl Harbor to pull them in when they should have reacted in 1939 as opposed to 1941. It's because it's distanced. The threat or the realities of the world are farther away. And so therefore, again, people are like, well, in Canada or the US, what's happening in the Ukraine actually doesn't affect me that much. So they think until it does.
Until it does. And then what are those people doing coming to our border? Yeah. Why do they want to come to Canada, right? Yeah.
Yes. And if you're underserved by the news media and you don't fully understand, then like you said, Anita, then it might wrongfully influence Canadian or North Americans' viewpoints of all these people coming to the border. Are these refugees legitimate? Are they economic refugees? Or are they trying to take advantage of our wonderful country? And unless you're really interested and vested in learning, you might not know, and then you might have perhaps not as factual or full understanding of what's happening.
Right. So again, it's important for us to be informed and to demand that we be informed. Maybe, I'm just thinking again something that was very controversial when the Ukraine-Russia conflict began. I think you'll recall it got quite a lot of flack in the press because there were several reporters. I don't remember which stations, but they were reporting in Ukraine, and they said something like, and don't quote me exactly, but these people are civilized like us. And then there was, a whole, discussion around that, a very strong response that, well, what about all the other people in the world that have been suffering from conflict? Are they somehow less civilized? So, again, this controversy, why do you think is there something missing in the journalism is it the journalists themselves? Is it that there's a certain, group that are dominating the industry? Would you like to open that up a little more for us?
Yeah, definitely. I think I can say in the journalist community, a lot of people were heartbroken to see that sort of commentary or that kind of reporting going on, because for a lot of us, we had hoped that we had gone beyond that in this diverse world.
Yeah,
and I use the word diverse because, when I started 25 years ago, the newsrooms were mostly Caucasian. And you definitely get a certain perspective. And these comments reflect that. It's the sense that, that colonial powers, whether it be the UK, the France, everything revolves around that. And therefore, this is the civilized world till you get further out to the developing countries or, the third world countries. And then they become less civilized. And to hear this, I believe that to the number of reporters who had said these examples, what they were trying to do is relate it back to their people, if you will, or their country. They were trying to say, for UK journalists, Ukraine is happening right on our doorstep. To the American reporter who made that comment, he was trying to say, this is close to us. But again, it was a Caucasian viewpoint. So what is missing or what is lacking, I would say, is there needs to be more diversity among the reporting pool, because like I said, journalists are told they should try to be as impartial as ever, but we're still biased because we're all individuals, and I'm biased. I'm biased in my own viewpoints and my own growing up experiences.
Sure.
So the more diversity we have, the more minority groups, if you will, just multicultural groups, the more women, the more mix of colors, if you will, the more full reporting, I believe, we will have. And it is happening. You see that across, and this is one thing that Al Jazeera and other networks really brought in, this idea that, hey, and they'll say, the bosses at Al Jazeera will say very, very clearly, we need more brown people. We need more yellow people. We need to make sure, we just need more diversity on our airwaves. So, and people that have refugee experiences, people that are multimillionaires as well, so that when they go into reporting, when they analyze a situation or give reports, they come with a full breadth. And if you have a team of people waiting in on Ukraine that have this multiple experiences, then you get a fuller, more rounded picture of what's going on.
Well, that's very well said. And, so then that journalist, though, would be of a different ilk, they would be of a sort of a worldly, a more globally aware person, having come from that diverse background. Whereas, when you talk about, coming from Canada and you've done very, very well as an international journalist, but, I'm thinking back to the school days, right? I mean, a lot of this comes from education. It starts off young, where we get those biases. And the beauty of your work is that, you're completely international, and so that you can, flow freely in all the spaces and sort of take that intimate knowledge with you. But I'm still wondering, though, if you're still producing a frame that the news has to show on conflict. So, I mean, we only ever see the conflict. We seldom see other imagery. I know it's not your job to produce the other imagery, but, because you're in a conflict zone. But is there any other possibility for explaining more of the dimension of the story? I don't know, without drawing out that sort of to feel sorry for, in other words, how could we present it that these are people anywhere in the world that are civilians, people like you and I, that just want a chance to live,
and these are
and
really
not
good
always
questions.
the conflict.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. It's almost like, whenever we cover the war, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, many people think the Intifada is constantly happening there, or it's constantly, but that's only like 2% of the area. The rest of the place is really peaceful. So you only, the perception you have is that it's just a conflict area, right? And how do you get beyond that? How do you help people understand and see people for who they are? That's time on the ground. And that goes back to budget. What I would say is that, for big conflicts, CNN has the budget to cover it for, say, a month, 2 months. Ukraine's ongoing, so you cover it for a long time. Afghanistan was very well covered for Canada because Canadian troops were there. But what's happening in Ethiopia right now, no one's there. Like Canadians are not there. What's happening in so many places around the world.
Or Yemen.
Yemen any longer, right? Yemen had this much coverage in Canada. Huge. The list is huge. Myanmar right now, the genocide that's happening there. Yeah, it's incredible. But the reason why the coverage only lasts a certain amount is twofold. One, budgets, because networks, especially those in Canada, don't have the budgets to cover all that's going on in terms of conflict. Number two is interest of viewers. Human nature is just built in a way where you want to hear the latest gossip. And the latest gossip is often the most hot zone or hot flare up wherever it's happening. It's Nancy Pelosi at this, visiting Taiwan and seeing China's reaction to that. And the blockade is happening around Taiwan, right? And then she flies off and we won't, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, we won't hear much about how long the blockade is happening and how long Taiwanese may suffer from that. Yeah. And what the political ramifications are. But say on a different network that has more resources like Al Jazeera, they will cover it extensively for quite a long time. An example of this was I covered the Haiti earthquake, I believe in 2011 for Al Jazeera. And this was a discussion that we were constantly having. How do we ensure that people just don't see the devastation and the suffering people, if you will, but to celebrate the life of the people and let people understand a full breadth of the culture of everything else that makes them proud as well. So Al Jazeera committed to having a bureau there for 1 full year. I set
Wow.
up the home for the place where we'd be based in. It was
So,
like
but
the
this was
former.
your initiative for Al Jazeera.
Well, no, it was along with their idea together.
Okay. All right.
So it wasn't purely my initiative. It was, led by the
Okay.
executive producers saying, and this is their approach again and again and again around
Yeah.
the world, and that's what made Al Jazeera great.
Yeah.
When it started, and they covered the full breadth. I was with a beautiful musician that was in the refugee camps that hadn't sung for 30 years. He was a legend, and then after the earthquake, he just felt this compulsion to sing, to lift the spirits of the people. And it was such a beautiful moment that gave people a sense of, Haitian music, and
Oh,
and and and
amazing.
and the,
Yeah.
and the vitality of the people and the resilience of the people. So when do those stories come about? They come about when there's a budget for journalists to stay and then to
Yeah.
celebrate. Now, the
Yeah.
question is, will viewers want to watch? There's always been a criticism that news only covers bad news, right? The
Yeah.
negative, as opposed to
Yeah.
the good news.
But that's how it
Well,
is, it seems. But yes, now when you mention that, will viewers want to watch? Canada's demographic is changing. We have many, many people from all around the world, newcomers that are interested in what goes on, in what happens back home. It doesn't matter if it's from Eritrea, from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, from Taiwan, wherever it may be, right? They're interested in what goes on back home, and they can't tune into a Canadian channel to get that, so they tune somewhere else, right? But with that changing demographic, it would make sort of sense, maybe business sense in at least for news channels to cover more because their Canadian demographic is changing. Am I wrong in thinking that, or?
you're not wrong in thinking that whatsoever, but I think you have to sort of encompass and look at the population as a whole beyond the urban centers, right? So the two networks are still trying to cover, the whole swath in terms of the demand, right? I think there needs to be international news, but I think also if viewers want better and more coverage, they need to be lobbying. They need to vocally be telling networks what needs to be covered. They need to be lobbying the government. The Trudeau government has been good. You have to give them kudos for realizing that the news TV networks and print have been decimated in the last 20 years. So they have been putting funds, towards supporting journalism overall. Mm-hmm. But it's a drop in the bucket if you look at how much is being spent in the UK, how much is being spent in France, in Germany. There just needs to be more funding because right now, this move from conventional cable to online, is decimating not only the TV revenue, but also newspapers. No one's buying newspapers any longer. So where do we get the funding to do good journalism to service people that want to know what's going on in the rest of the world?
All right, good point. Absolutely. And yes, we should lobby, but I don't know if people don't know what they're missing, then they don't know that they have to lobby. But yes, I'm sure some of our population will know what they're missing. I'm maybe just an odd person. I don't know, maybe others feel like me, but I just feel that these are people just like you and I, no matter where they are in the world. And any of those conflict, bloody scenes or, war is always the loss of somebody's mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, uncle, child, grandmother. And I often can't handle it. I don't know how we might be able. I know we democratically have to cover these things because people want to know, but I'm just wondering if they care.
Yes.
How to create global care, how to make someone understand that that's somebody's grandmother, sister, brother, aunt, child, just like it could be your child.
And that's always been, that's always a journalist challenge, right? And I'd say that's been my challenge as well. How do we make people care, especially if a conflict is happening half a world away? And I remember I was covering the Tohoku earthquake, the big earthquake in Japan that happened, I think, again in 2011. And there was a debate between my camera person and my local producer and myself because we had been in a decimated town, nothing left. And we were by a river, and we saw this father and his two sons jumping from one submerged car to the next, and then stopping when they found their car. And I remember them looking inside, and my cameraman was still rolling at the time. And then they realized the father had found his wife, his sons had found their mother, and their two daughters and sisters. And my cameraman wanted to button off and stop the record because he said, this is a private family matter.
See, but
and they were weeping. They were weeping. And I fought with them and I said, you got to leave it on, because, you know, how do you express to Canadians, you know, or to anyone around the world, the tragedy of an earthquake of this magnitude? It's in these moments, like you said, you know, these are family members, just like it could be your mother or your wife or your children. And so they listened to me, fortunately, and kept recording. And I believe is one of the most powerful stories we had on for the entire, you know, coverage of the earthquake. And it was an important one. So these are sort of debates that we're having on the ground that are outside of newsrooms. You know, and then later on, we often will debate it with our executives in the newsrooms who will say, this is too graphic, Steve. You know, we can't have this on, but I would argue and say, but we have to. And then we'll go back and forth. Again, often it's the conversation is not, you know, are we going to shape it a certain way, but it's, is it too much for the viewer or not too much?
Right. Well, maybe what I'll do to wrap up is talk about the earthquake I was in here in Istanbul in 1999. And, you know, despite all the carnage and the horrible collapse of buildings and so on, you know, what was rich for me was how people helped each other, how people who were from such vastly different backgrounds joined together and worked together collectively to save the people. These moments of you know, richness, rather than the crashing of the buildings, this beautiful collective togetherness is more important in the story for me than the how many buildings collapsed. But, you know, it's all about the weight in the, you know, what people want to see, what we make them want to see, you know, this negativity, you know, over and over and over. Maybe there's some way in the future to change the discourse, still get the messages across, but also give this other element of the fundamental human beings that are around the world that we all need to care more about, because, you know, we just need that right now in a world that's unraveling. So maybe on that note, you know, your wisdom will take you further, and you know, we'll find new ways of communicating these human moments that we so much need.
I agree with you fully.
World.
I agree with you fully, Anita. And I think it, you know, if we aren't able to convey that, then it's the journalists failing as well. And I think we're always trying to find ways to make, you know, more compelling stories or forms of storytelling to engage with the people. Yeah. And we are living in a technological age where that way of conveying stories is changing so quickly. The young generation is getting information from TikTok, you know, getting information from Instagram rather than, you know, than conventional news. And so how do we inform the younger generation? There are so many challenges. But what I would always stress is that it's got to be two ways. You know, we have to institute in education among parents and families to encourage people to be interested. And then on the other side, for journalists to push their networks for more coverage, to push the networks to go outside the wire, to do more, to get out there and be in the dirt, as I always say, and just cover things, be in the dirt and just celebrate, like you said, when there's moments to celebrate and make people care during that as well, beyond the conflict. We need to get beyond the, if it bleeds, it leads sort of way of journalism, which is Fleet Street, which is very old, but then we have to get beyond human nature.
Yeah, the old tabloids.
Yes.
Anyway, a great discussion. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing your experiences and wisdom with us. And maybe this has helped some of our people watching get another perspective on news and the world. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.